Welcome back to Alimentos y Emociones podcast. Today we're going to talk to Professor Amelia Lake on food environments and behavior change. Amelia is a dietitian and public health nutritionist who works as a professor of public health nutrition at Teesside University and is an associate director of FUSE, the Center for Translational Research in Public Health. Her current work is to explore the obesogenic environment. Amelia has a particular interest in the food environment, the environments of young people, energy drinks, the workplace environment, science communication, and knowledge exchange. Her research involves transdisciplinary collaborations to examine how the environment interacts with individual behaviors. Please remember to share this episode, subscribe to Alimentos podcast, both on YouTube and Spotify. Leave a comment and press the notification button. Help us grow this channel. Also, remember that on Spotify you can leave us some stars. This helps to position the podcast as a way of disseminating science and help us grow our community. You can do this by entering the Alimentos y Emociones podcast profile on Spotify. Next to the bell, you will find 3 vertical dots where it says, rate this program. Rate us and help us grow. Welcome everybody to Alimentos y Emociones podcast. I'm really excited to have today with us Professor Amelia Lake. Hello, Amelia. It's so nice to have you here on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, it's a great pleasure. We're going to talk about food environments and their relationships to behavior change in general. And I'm going to be sort of leaving you with, her Twitter feed and everything so that you can connect up with her and read all the papers and information that of her publications and the work that she's doing here on the podcast. So, right, let's start from, I'm really excited about you being here because you are a dietitian. And as you know, everyone knows around here that I'm a dietitian as well. So, how did you start off as a dietitian in the work that you're doing now?
Okay, so I trained as a dietitian back in 1999. That's when I qualified, and I did go into clinical practice, but I lasted 5 months because I knew that I wanted to do research, and I knew specifically I was interested more in public health research. So I had tried at the end of my undergrad degree, I tried to go and do a master's in public health nutrition, but I had been advised to go, I'd qualified as a dietitian, and the advice had been go and get some lived experience, go and work, and then come back. So actually, I never ever did a master's because I did 5 months of my clinical, what we call in the UK, basic grade dietitian. So that was a rotation around a hospital setting. And whilst it was interesting, I knew it just wasn't for me. I knew it wasn't. I knew, but I also knew that from placement. I knew that when I'd been a student, I was always annoying the research dietitians from Glasgow University, who also had an office in the hospital where I did my placements. So yes, I did 5 months and very quickly got a job at Newcastle University under Ashley Adamson, who's now Professor of Public Health Nutrition at Newcastle University, who's also a dietitian. So I saw a job advertised with Ashley and Professor Ruggun, who's from a dentistry background, and also Professor John Mathers, also from nutrition background. And I had that job interview, and in January 2000, I moved from my clinical role to a research role at Newcastle University, exploring longitudinal dietary change from adolescence through to adulthood.
Yeah.
And that was a very short contract, and nobody in my working world could understand why I was leaving a secure job to go to an 18-month contract. It just seemed like, why are you so mad? But then it got even crazier, because when that job finished, I went back to being a student and did a fast track PhD based on that study. So that was a welcome funded piece of work, looking at the tracking of diet. And that's what we based my PhD on. I was looking at why people's diets did or did not track from early adolescence through to their 30s. And it did, diet tracked, body weight tracked. So, it just shows the importance of diets at that, 11, 12-year-old. It's really, really important, because that's setting your diet up and your health up for your life.
Yeah,
so
I found those papers really, really interesting, as well as hugely cited.
yes.
And I think that anyone looking into like seeing that, the longitudinal aspect of, because we all, we're used to seeing sort of maybe longitudinal work in adults, or older adults and stuff, but it was a really interesting piece of work. Thank you for that.
It's a really, well, thank you to the people who collected the data before me, and it's a really fascinating cohort, and really excellent that we had data from 1980 that in 2000 we could follow them up as adults. So I was going to do, when I became a PhD, called general practice. Oh, I'm going to turn my video off because I think my internet's unstable. So whilst I was also doing my PhD, I was also doing some clinical work in a general practice, and also in a diabetes centre. So I was keeping my my hand in, trying to make sure I maintained my clinical skills, because I knew they would be useful.
Yeah.
And so from longitudinal dietary change, the next job that came up was a postdoctoral position in a study called LifeLax. So I know, Claudia, you've looked at my profile. Have you any idea what I might have been looking at then?
No.
Okay.
I was going to ask you.
The clues in lax, it was about constipation and laxatives.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting, but I think I decided that wasn't where I wanted to work going forward. So while it was an interesting study, I at the same time was applying for NIHR, which is our National Institute for Health Research in the UK. I was applying for postdoctoral fellowships. And an area that I had become interested in from my PhD work was the importance of the environment. And at the time, we were starting to use the word obesogenic environment. So this is back in 2005.
Yeah.
So and there was
like the early beginnings of describing the obesogenic environment. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. So that was quite early on, and I was at Newcastle at the time, and we assembled a group of experts. For example, planner, Professor Tim Townsend, who I'm still working with today. That's a collaboration that's gone on. And we were particularly interested in how young people, so I'd looked at 11 to 12-year-olds in my PhD, but there was the older adolescents, so those kind of 16 to 18, end of school, beginning university. There was very little information about them. And the reason why is because they're a pretty difficult group to A, access, and B, obtain data from. But we had some interesting pieces of work, and that also involved a PhD student called Rachel Tyrrell, who put GPS monitors on these children and young people. We knew what environments they went into, we knew what environments they passed. But a lot of that work just told us how financially savvy, how financially aware these children and young people were. and they were really, really price sensitive. And this has been backed up by lots of research. And currently at the moment in the UK, we are having what we call a cost of living crisis.
Yes.
Which is a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
Effect, we've got instability because of the war in Ukraine. We've got instability as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so there are lots of issues. And I think even back then in 2007-8, we could see that habits and food choices are driven very much by cost, and not just what's available, but how much things are. So that was as you say, that was the early work. And around that time in the UK, we also had a really important report came out called the Foresight Obesity Report.
Yes. Yeah.
And we've
all used that.
Yes, the spaghetti diagram, the systems map. We're all familiar with that. And I suppose that was the beginnings of people really acknowledging that obesity was much more than individual level behavior change. So
or that I always say, or I think I've seen, a lot of now is that, weight is not a behavior. And we treat weight usually as a behavior, but actually weight is not a behavior. So what are the behaviors around that, or what is going on around us?
Correct. And it just this acknowledgement and this need to acknowledge that what an individual can access in terms of their food is not simply driven by the individual's decisions. It's a much wider system. So if we think about, a whole systems approach, well, until COVID, we didn't really, people didn't, at least in this country, they most normal people, non-academics, didn't think about the food system as much as, or weren't as aware of it as we are now. And I think, again, COVID, war in Ukraine, everyone is aware of this wider system and the impact it has on what somebody actually eats in their home. So that
do you think we've already seen, like, for example, from the war in Ukraine, the effects of it, or are we just seeing the beginning of it? Or is it just like, because I still think, for example, let's just say wheat, and how there might be sort of wheat shortages and, just food shortages in that, with that respect, with as far as sort of distribution of, and countries like the UK that are, that require an awful lot of food being brought in, because you can't produce that much food because of climate, because of, I don't know, extension of the country, an island, I mean, all sorts of things. I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, have we seen really the effects that it's going to have? Is it going to have more effects on the long term?
I understand from reading about the topic and, reading from experts like Professor Tim Lang that actually this is just the beginning of it.
Or the tip of the iceberg, I would say.
And what we are beginning to see, obviously, is increases in cost of everything. And obviously that's got to do with Ukraine because of the cost of fuel, and the production of food has gone up. So the cost of everything has gone up, and that's regardless. That's not quite yet because of the shortage. So I think we're on the cusp of something food-wise that I know in the UK at the moment, it's very, very topical. And for example, I don't know if you're aware, but just before the weekend, we had a government U-turn over the proposed both ban of advertising and also the ban of buy one, get one free. And the excuse, the reason being given is the cost of living crisis, when we know that actually those are not foods that do anything nutritionally. So
what was the actual, I mean, for those who don't know, who don't know about this, what was the actual sort of turn back on the, I think it's here, because I wrote it down here, because, you know, it's like not language that I kind of use, just it was like going back on the actual, what's it called? Sorry.
So they had promised,
yes,
in our obesity strategy, they had promised that we would be having a ban on unhealthy food advertising before 9 o'clock, and that was due to start in January. And we know that there's
2023
very strong lobbying. Sorry,
in 2023.
Correct, January 2023. So that's been pushed back. And then the other one was a ban on the buy one product, get one free. And we know that the foods that are likely to be buy one, get one free are generally unhealthy.
Yeah.
And there's analysis being done by the Department of Health that shows that those foods will not impact on the cost of living. A lot of this is on my Twitter stream, because I spent a lot of time on Saturday retweeting some of the evidence for that. It's not work I've done, but it's really, really, really important.
It is.
So it's almost like the lobbyists are seeing this cost of living crisis as an opportunity to turn back things that would have actually had a benefit on people's health. So yes, it's very turbulent at the moment, I think, and I think it's probably quite turbulent globally.
Yes, it is turbulent globally, but it's terribly sad, because I don't actually think that has very much to do with nutrition. It has more to do with, you know, economics, and oh dear,
correct,
I'm going to stop making as much money as I did.
Correct.
Yeah, let's not get into, you know, the really nitty gritty. I'm sure that, you know, it's kind of obvious, but it's so sad, because then, you know, I think, like as you said, and looking at that whole sort of obesogenic environment, it is so much more complicated than just what I eat or how much exercise I do.
And it's also more complicated than, for example, TV or media. And it's also more complicated than buy one, get one free offers. But we know that with obesity, we have to come at it at different angles, because there are so many different ways of tackling it. So, you know, if we think about for example, advertising. So yes, online advertising, TV advertising, but an area that we've done a little bit of work around is, for example, bus shelters, where a lot of children wait for their school buses. So we did some work, and that's published in Public Health Nutrition.
Yeah, I saw that with London Transport.
No, that's a different one. So the Public Health Nutrition publication is about looking in the area where Teesside University is, which is Middlesbrough and Redcar, which is extremely, we're in the north of England, and it's extremely deprived. Yeah. And in that area, you know, looking at that outdoor environment and those cues that might encourage, for example, children and young people to eat less healthy food is really, really quite important. We've got no legislation around, you know, what's on our bus shelters or what the outdoor advertising is. But the one you bring up, the Transport for London, that's a fascinating example. And I was one of the large team that looked at the evaluation, but that was led by Steve Cummings and colleagues at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Yeah. And the main paper from that is in Plus One Medicine. Yeah. And that shows that it made a difference, that if you stop advertising these food, people buy less of these foods. Yeah. You know, so I think the Mayor of London, if we're talking about politics, the Mayor of London and his team were really brave to take on that challenge. Yeah. Yes. And if you look, we one of the first bits of work that we did was a media analysis.
Yes.
In response to that ban. And it's fascinating because it was so negative. It was so negative about something that has a positive health effect. Health effect. So,
but who is driving the negativity of the ban?
I'll put that back to you. Who do you think?
Well, I know.
Yes.
But you know,
the people with the financial interest in that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it happens here as well, you know, very, very much so. It happens everywhere. And again, like I was saying earlier, I mean, I don't want to get hugely into the politics, but it, you know, if they are sort of paying for my campaign, then I'm not going to say no to banning, you know, their food products, basically. But I've always said to my students, I've never, ever thought that the food industry was at all interested in our health or our nutrition.
Well, we've got a really interesting case around Kellogg's in the UK, who are going to take the government to court over the cereal being unhealthy, because they say, well, you add milk to cereal and that makes it less healthy. So there's lots happening around this at the moment, and I suppose what we have now with social media is that there's an ability for academics as well as groups are interested in the health of people, especially children and young people, like Sustain, like Bike Back 2030. We can, you know, which is led by children and young people themselves. We can join forces together and give that message back. You know, since the 90s, there have been nearly 700 policies in this country addressing obesity.
Ouch, that's a very long list.
So that's a very interesting analysis by Thesis and White, Dolly Thesis, both at Cambridge. It's a really interesting paper to have a look at, where you see that there have been so many policies and yet so little change, so little effect. But you know, the policy environment is one of the environments. If you start to think about the obesogenic environment, and the policy environment, as we know, in both Mexico and in the UK, if you think about the sugar levy, a fantastic example of a policy environment that then forces reformulation and forces change, which, you know, that is an excellent example.
And we have seen it. I mean, it is actually really interesting, you know, to go to, you know, the shelves basically over the last, you know, it's going to be 2 years now, 18 months, and actually seeing the reformulation of products. It's actually, it's quite consoling. It's, you know, and you know, obviously there's a lot of people who say, oh, but it's crazy, you know, people are just going to still eat, you know, whether they have hexagons on them or not. But, you know, again, as a dietitian, and you're curious and you're looking at what's going on, but you can see the difference. And then all of a sudden the same product appears without, you know, at least one of the hexagons or stuff. So that is interesting. You know, you have this, what is it? It's a session with your Fuse work that you do this week. And
we do, yes.
You know, about the urban design for health and healthy places and communities. And I love this diagram that you use of, it would be like the Forsyth sort of condensed.
It's a very simplified one. So that's been done by my colleague, Tim Townsend, who is from a planning background. And it just really emphasizes that, you know, all of this, the food environment, the green infrastructure, home environments, they're all interconnected. It's all, you know, it's back to this systems-wide approach.
Yes.
And if we're trying to encourage people to eat healthily, you know, we have to think about, well, what's their home, and have they got a safe home where they can cook? Have they got tools and implements to cook in? And how do they access food? Where in the area they live, is it mostly fast food, or is there actually anywhere where they can get raw ingredients? Or in this country we have a lot of food banks, which is where people can go and get food. Again, this has been because of some politicians' comments, this has been very, very political and controversial. But it's this lack of this food insecurity and people's inability to access food in a country as wealthy as the UK,
yes,
is quite frankly a disgrace. It's it's a disgrace, and it means that we cannot talk about anything to do with food without thinking about it through this health inequalities perspective.
Yes.
And that health inequalities translates to the areas where people live. So we know that people who live in more deprived areas have a higher proportion of unhealthy food outlets, so takeaway outlets. Yep. We know lots of things. We know they're going to be poor health. We know they're going to have higher rates of obesity. We know the children are going to be more overweight and obese. It's this clustering of health inequalities that we need to address this whole inequalities, as well as working away at issues around food and environments. And in this country, we have planning laws that allow us to use these as levers to try and improve the environment.
Yes.
And that's what the event on Wednesday is talking about, that, and also thinking about it through an inequalities lens.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a great topic. And I mean, I know that this will have been a subject that that will have already have happened, or an event that will have already have happened once we, once this podcast airs, but still just, putting these topics on the table, and talking about these things are just really important. So
it is that event will be recorded, and it will be on the Fuse website.
Okay. So I will leave, a link as well to the Fuse website, so, because it's really important just to be able to have access to all this information as well. For those who are trying to work in this area, who are trying to get involved, who are obviously particularly interested in food environments, in inequalities, and just public health nutrition in general. If I was going to say to you, what would you recommend to those, for example, dietitians who are wanting to get into these areas? How do you go about it? Because you could take obviously just the research standpoint, but do you think working in the within the system, if you like, in the big companies, does that work? Do you think there is space for dietitians there as well? In the policy field, what other areas are we looking at? We need new people to get involved as well.
We do, and regardless of what
background,
what the background, or what the interests are of food companies, at the end of the day, we all have to work with them because we have to eat. We need food companies. So it is so important to have properly qualified people working within them, and there are some very, very well respected nutritionists and dietitians working within those companies, and which is absolutely fine. And there needs to be dialogue between the companies, between civil society. So also working, I think the most important voice in all of this is working with communities. So for example, in a lot of the work that I do, where we're looking at particular areas, it's really important that we perhaps even have researchers who are from the local community. We bring on board people from the local community to be peer researchers, to work with us, and that we're upskilling the community as well.
Voicing the community, literally.
Sorry?
Voicing the community.
Correct, yeah, because their voice is the most important voice in all of this. So it's really important to speak to the people that changes might affect. Yeah. But also working within local authority structures. In the UK, we have like local government that can sometimes be called, and working within those. And I think it's working across professions and professions listening. And sometimes that's quite difficult because professions talk in different languages. So, even academics from different academic disciplines talk in different languages. So it's that constant, the key issue is communication. And that's something we've found from our research, even looking at how you can successfully block, say, another fast food restaurant in your area. One of the key things is having a public health team that works really well with either an economic team or a planning team, that they work together. That communication's key, and that's true across everything.
Yeah, everything. That sounds really good. But the research part, start off with like some form of degree of public health, that sort of area.
Yeah, so I think with getting it, do you mean getting into research in this area? Yeah, I think degrees in nutrition, or specifically in public health nutrition, or if you have a degree in that, looking to expand into a master's degree. Yeah. But which is excellent, or looking for, if you're already qualified, looking for opportunities where you can get experience working in that area. Yeah. And at the moment, well, particularly in the UK, with for example, holiday clubs in more deprived areas, where they're trying to increase better food intake for children who, when they're out of school, will be hungry over the summer holidays. Yeah, so there are lots of schemes like that, that they're crying out for nutritionists to work with them. So there are lots of diverse opportunities, and you don't necessarily have to have a dietetic degree. Yeah, there are roles for people with nutrition degrees, very much so. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. Well, I don't know, do you want to point someone into a specific area right now, the Fuse work that you're doing, anything else, or a particular paper, something that you would like to sort of just talk about, so that we can slowly wrap this up? Okay. I think the Fuse website has lots of resources, and there is a Fuse blog. We're always looking for people to write for our blog. Invitation open. Yes. And there are also what we call Fuse briefs, and there's quite a range of them on different topics that I've been involved in, for example, from energy drinks and children and young people, right through to the healthy planning that we were talking about. So that's on the Fuse website under Fuse briefs. So yeah. I know you're asking me about specific project. Just back what you were saying about research and getting research into practice. We're at Fuse, we're a centre for translational research. Yes. And the evidence suggests that it takes 17 years for a piece of research to make its way into policy. And at Fuse, we very much talk about, involving both our practice partners as well as the public in our research from a very early stage, so that it is impactful and it is meaningful. So it's about doing, academic research with people who are at what we call at the coal face. So they are doing that work. So working with them to develop your research ideas, so it's actually meaningful, not just looks not just looks good on paper, but is meaningful and has the potential to change things. So an example of that is our work on energy drinks, which started when an alcohol worker at a local authority came to us saying, oh, we've got parents and we've got school teachers don't know what to do about energy drinks. Kids are coming into school with these energy drinks. You know, parents think they're energy, so they're healthy. What are we going to do? So energy drinks are drinks that are, for example, like Monster, Red Bull. You probably have the same brands as we have here.
Gatorade or something like that.
Yeah. So a lot of them are, in this country, we have a lot of them are also unbranded, so very cheap. So four cans for £1. I don't know what that and so it's very, very cheap. So very good for children. We were talking about children being very savvy about finance. So that piece of work we co-produced, and we even got some of the children as researchers surveying the areas around their schools where they could get energy drinks. We also produced a systematic review that was published in 2016 in BMJ Open, and then the first ever piece of qualitative work with children and young people from the UK, which showed that kids as young as 10 were drinking these energy drinks, which say on them, not for children, says on it in very small letters. But that work plus other campaigning meant that got written in a government green paper. But has yet to come into policy. But a lot of shops have bans on the sale of these to children under 16 as a result of that evidence and also the campaigning. So I think that
didn't take 17 years.
It didn't. It took a very short space of time. Yeah,
and that's the sort of work that really we need to be doing. I always find, sometimes, we're researching up in the lab and, and it never sort of comes down, does it? You're like, it's totally separate. So really good to see. Well done on that.
Well, when we get it into policy, we can celebrate. But but a lot of that raised the awareness and made people aware that these are not healthy. That amount of caffeine is not good. It's not what we should be letting children and young people have in their bodies. It has negative effects on their education, on their health outcomes. But we still need to do more. But
so what's your next pet project?
Well, we've been very interested in doing more work with the local communities around their food environment and their food systems. So we have quite a lot of stuff going on, but one particular piece of work is around what we call generally social supermarkets. So they are not food banks, but they are discounted food that usually comes from food surplus. And these social supermarkets are usually run by charities or schools or community groups, and it allows local communities to access cheaper food in their locality, but also gives them a bit more autonomy, and it's less stigmatizing than, for example, a food bank where they're given food and they don't necessarily have a lot of choice over what they can choose. So we're looking at that and just looking at in terms of what people eat from those social supermarkets. And that's being led by my colleague, Dr. Claire O'Malley. So that's a piece of work we're very excited about, because that's being done with the communities to see what is the effect on the diets of people.
Wow, that sounds really, really interesting, really. I think probably a word or that we will be hearing more often. Social supermarkets.
Yes.
really interesting, especially right now with all what you were, putting it into context with all the economic upheaval that we have currently.
I think what we're going to see is, particularly in this country, is an unraveling of the food system as we know it. So we tend to think about the food system in terms of the large supermarkets. But as more and more data comes through from organizations like the Food Foundation, who are a third sector organization, they've got some fantastic information on their website. We can see that so many more people are being forced into food poverty. So that is going to change how people shop for food. I think, we're on a cusp of a very big change that we probably haven't known in a while. We need to change how we think about what people's actual food environment is.
Yes.
Because thanks to COVID, we know that the online food has just gone like this, much faster than it would have before COVID. So the food environment's always evolving, if we think every country anywhere, it's constantly evolving, constantly different influences coming in, and that's brilliant. That's how it should be. Yeah. But it's that, it's keeping that concept of, well, yes, it's changing, but is it changing in a way that benefits people, or are we allowing certain segments of the population to be subjected to really heavy bombardment with food that is not good for their health? So we need to be constantly watching as it evolves and changes.
Wow, that I look forward to seeing, the next work that you will be sort of publishing on this, and following you on Twitter has actually been a real pleasure. And watching, just how you are also being a very important voice for these topics on food environment, and also, just communicating nutrition in a different way. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and thank you also for sharing this space with us. I'm going to leave, like I said, your Twitter, for everyone to see, because that's where you appear to be most active, and I think we need to follow you and follow the work that you're doing. I shall also leave a link to the work, to your publications, and particular ones relating to the subjects that we've touched on today. Amelia, thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you, and sorry for the interruption by my small person, by one small person.
We accept, we understand that this is life. That is, that's the way it is.
It is indeed. And no, thank you for the important work you're doing. So I think it's wonderful to be communicating about what people do in the world of nutrition, because there's lots of us doing lots of different things. So it's good that you're putting different people's voices out.
Yeah, hopefully we can all, do different work together, and that, I think that collaboration as well is really important. So yes. Thank you once again for being here. And to everyone, please remember to follow the podcast and to leave your comments on the podcast. That's really important, so that, more people get to listen and hear to these important conversations. So thank you. And remember that we continue to nourish each other. Gracias por escuchar un episodio más de Alimentos y Emociones Podcast. No olvides dejar un comentario, suscribirte al canal y presionar el botón de notificaciones. Ayúdanos a crecer. Y recuerda, nos seguimos nutriendo.